We've heard today, the numbers vary a bit, but of course we're big trading partners. That is excellent. The world has changed dramatically and we all welcome that. We've heard about the excellence in exchange and education. That is fantastic. The challenge is that we're still a long way behind in our ability to trade intellectual property between the two nations. And there's obviously a very clear opportunity because of the strengths of the individual nations in creating a really strong reciprocal capacity building in my particular area, which is biomedical research and health in general. Let's just look at some numbers. One of the measures, the key metrics of the world of research are published scientific articles. This is what we see over the years, where the US has always dominated in the last decade there. Australia is very small. We publish above our weight, but we're, of course, a very small nation. Now, look what's happened. Most of us who are trained to be US and Eurocentric would never have even thought, and many are still in denial, that the speed at which China has joined the international publishing world. And if you look at this in my territory, China has now surpassed Australia's ability to publish in the most prestigious medical and biological research journals. We'd have never thought of that a decade ago that would actually happen. And these are global publications. It's incredibly exciting. Okay, that's better. Right. And let's look at what's happening in the dynamics between Australia and China. If we look at all of the published data, scientific articles across the world, and there's several million of them, that's very well collected by Thomson Reuters, you can see the dramatic rise in Australia-China collaborations in the last 10 years. Although it's still our collaborations with the US, these are scientific collaborations between two or more organisations, you can see a six-fold increase between China and Australia. The world has changed. We don't have to convince anybody. But this sets a phenomenal foundation for the sharing of intellectual property and value and wealth creation. The top players, we don't have to go through all of them, but I've dug out the top 5 collaborators in China and the top 5 in Australia. Probably no surprise there. They're all in the education sector, but they're quite easily identifiable. And in the areas, this is where the surprise comes out, most of the collaboration is taking place in engineering and the physical and chemical sciences. And what surprised me is how relatively little collaboration there is in the biomedical and health sciences. That's where the huge opportunity comes. It was really quite surprising to see that we're actually avoiding each other on biomedical research, relatively. Now let's move on to patents, because this, where I gave my examples, is the foundation stone of being able to trade in monopolies and intellectual property position, which are essential for the investment in some of these products. So here we have, Japan has always dominated the international world of patent applications. Australia has always underachieved relatively. We only put in about 11,000 applications per year, and we know that. And part of that is because we're very publicly based in our research and there are no funds for patents. So that's one of the reasons. So you can see the US there. Look, and everybody has been imprinted in the last 2 decades to say how poor China is at intellectual property. It doesn't respect intellectual property rights. China is incredibly powerful, and within the last decade has created a wonderfully sophisticated patent system that's equal to anyone in the world, without a doubt. And that is a surprise. Okay. And China has now become the second largest patent office in the world. The interesting thing is Australia is 10th. In other words, many economies value Australia as a market because those are patents lodged in Australia in order to have exclusivity in the Australian market. Okay. Now, this is where our challenge comes, where we're avoiding each other. This is of total filings in China. This was in the year 2010. So there's nearly 400,000 patent filings in China. Most of them are only in China. So Chinese patents are really just focused in China, only 25% international. But that's where they're filing international, the Chinese. This is where Australia, we're much smaller, 25,000, but 90% of our filings are actually international ones. Of Australian inventions, we go internationally with them. Now, look at the dynamic here, those two there. For China, in this year, only lodged 242 patents in Australia, and Australia, only 608. And our organisation accounted for 10 of those 608, I can assure you, which is still absolutely quite surprising. So that's where the challenge is. Very strong economies, great trade in agriculture and rocks, but where's the intellectual exchange that will create it? I'll finish off on my comments about where I come from. We're Australia's oldest medical research institute. We're very, very small. We have around about 800 people. We focus on cancer, inflammatory diseases, and infectious disease, and we're absolutely rampantly passionate about collaborations. So for a small organisation, we operate with projects, 250 projects spread across 120 countries and 43 countries, including China, of course. And we were really passionate about increasing our presence with Chinese partners. And what the challenge we see is a wonderful opportunity for creating intellectual property in all technologies, but in our world, biomedical science. We're highly dependent on international students. In our sector, 45% of all researchers in Australia come from offshore through the Department of Immigration. In our institute, 2/3 of our PhD students at the moment are of Chinese origin. Dramatically changed. Australia has building its capacity with new institutes and things for medical research hospitals. There are not sufficient domestic Australian people interested in a career in biomedical research and research in general. Australia needs researchers. China is one of the best sources because Chinese are incredibly good at mathematics, which is one of our weaknesses. And what else has happened? Well, China is building up very rapidly a pharmaceutical industry, and we share one thing in common here, and this is where we can get mutual gain. One thing is obviously the mutual training and capacity building with human capital. The second one is we are both experiencing an epidemic due to affluence and ageing in cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, degeneration, neurodegeneration, and hepatitis. Where both nations have these problems, we've got to come together to solve them. And that's where I think we've got a wonderful future together, but it's underpinned by intellectual property. Thank you very much.